And this week, we take a look at relations between Nigeria and China, while also analyzing the war against terror in Nigeria. This is Standpoint. I am Precious Amayu. Let's begin with developments surrounding Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi's visit to Nigeria. President Bola Tinubu has asked the Chinese government to increase the $2 billion currency swap between Nigeria and China to enhance trade between both countries. President Tinubu is also seeking an upward review of the 50 billion naira aid package for Africa, which China's President Xi Jinping announced last year. He says increasing the level of currency swaps will speed up the infrastructural development in Nigeria and deepen the strategic bilateral relations. The Chinese Foreign Minister also met with Nigeria's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Yusuf Tuga, on efforts to improve bilateral ties between both countries. Now, for more on this development, we are joined by Public Affairs Analyst Gbola Oba. He joins me in our studio here at Eco Atlantic. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Happy to you. It's been a while.
Same to you, to be honest with you. Yes, it's been a while.
It's been a while.
And you guys are migrating anyway. This is a new state of the art.
Absolutely. I know this is your first visit, so welcome to our new studio.
Thank you.
Well, let's get into this conversation. China, Nigeria, China, Africa. But I want us to look at it, broadly before we zero in, on Nigeria, because first of all, it's China's relations with Africa, not just Nigeria. And we see that this has become a tradition for China to visit Africa, on the very first his very first visit for the year, compared to what you will see the Americans do or Europeans do. China seems to be taking the lead in terms of relations with Africa.
Oh, okay. Let me start by saying that I am I'm neither a xenophobe or a xenophile. I'm neither a lover or a hater of China. But what I've seen over the years, following the Chinese government's strategy for development, especially Chinese government's strategy for development, is that they are very, very practical. They know what they want and they go for what they want. Let's be very honest with ourselves. In view of the fact that every schooled intellectual believes that the global diplomatic scenario is going to be very, very raucous from 2015, especially because of the second coming of Trump too. The Chinese are doing what ordinarily some of us expected them to do from the moment that Trump was gaining momentum, even within the Republican Party, before he even got elected. And the reason is, inevitably, even if it's just for histrionic, purpose, Trump is going to disrupt the relationship, the commercial relationship between China and to be very honest with you, one of very few things that the American political class have bipartisan predisposition to now is their xenophobia. There is a common hatred between the two major parties in America. So in order to cultivate other markets, in order to still make themselves very relevant internationally, in order to take advantage of the eccentricities that the new President of America will bring into the diplomatic spectrum, they're doing what everybody expects them to do. So the visit to Nigeria, they promise to increase the
currency swap,
the package of the currency swap, the very likelihood that they will increase the commitment for infrastructure development in Africa. These are things that some of us have emphasized anyway.
You mentioned Trump, and he's quite, transactional in his approach to things. It's more of what's in it for America compared to just giving you aid. If it does, it does have to benefit America as well. And Europe seems so far from Africa in terms of development and economy, it almost doesn't know how to relate to Africa anymore. And China seems to be filling up that position. Are we going to see that drastically improve, even now that you have Trump coming on board, that China and Russia would occupy more of that position in Africa than you've had the West?
China stands a better advantage of harnessing the opportunities that the chaotic diplomatic environment will present. China more. And the reason why China stands a better advantage, stands at a very, very advantageous point is because China has a track record of ingratiating itself as a trading partner, as an infrastructure provider,
and not a moral watchdog, as America would.
And because they don't have any ideological qualms about how you run your country, they'll tell you they're not interested in issues like respect for the rule of law, human rights, corruption. It's none of their business. They come in with an agenda, and the agenda is what instructs what they do. They are not involved in any of these other paraphernalia of governance or quality of human life, your human rights records. So I want to believe that China would ultimately, from 2025, gain a degree of traction that will put it at a seemingly advantageous position relative to the United States of America and Europe. Look, Europe is going through a mess that they caused historically for themselves. Look at the situation of France. France, for centuries, indeed, after flag and anthem independence, for decades, overexploited the Francophone countries. Now, as a result of a mixture of opportunism, a mixture of revulsion, opportunism, and France is literally being kicked out of those countries. Literally being kicked out. In fact, a couple of days ago, the last French battalion, or the last French military presence in one of these countries was practically kicked out. So, and the same thing is happening to the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom, because of its arrogance and conceit of superiority relative to even other Europeans, they got themselves out of Europe. They are now in a situation where they know that the economy is shrinking because of that act of arrogance. But you know what? Even if politically it's going to be difficult for anybody to take them back, the present government, Keir Starmer's government, wants to at least a rapprochement of a sort, but that rapprochement could only go far because there are some in the EU who are determined that the UK must be flagellated, well scorched for what it has done, so that it does not serve as a precedent for some other members to want to leave. And some of them are getting vindicated now because, it is obvious now that the UK economy is shrinking. So I'm sitting there now thinking, ironically, it will ostensibly seem initially that the activities of Donald Trump may mess up China's commercial strategy. But I see a China that is already building bridges with the alternative markets. Nigeria, look at our trade record with China.
You add to that is Belt and Road Initiative. But a lot of people will say, look, they got it right with that initiative, and that's where America is struggling to meet up. They've started Prosper Africa. They've started, I think, AGOA has always been there. Under Trump, there was Prosper Africa, and then Biden did follow through. Now they are building the Lobito corridor, in Africa as well, almost like trying to catch up with what China is doing. But is there also a sense that we relate with China, whether it's historically, and when you look at how both economies were, China has moved far up, but how we all started, And then in terms of population as well, we have really, and I'm talking about Africa and China. So is there a sense where we also relate more, with a kind of developmental model than, any other country?
You see, your question, as intelligent as your question is speaking to certain sentiments within the Nigerian intelligentsia. And we must be very careful not to run headlong with the likely disillusionment that sentiment will throw at us. China is in this for no reason of sentiment. They just want a situation where they profit from Africa. Anybody listening to me now, I would rather ask Gbola Oba and shake China on infrastructure. Let me give you a practical example. I don't even want to speak to the macro. Let me speak to the micro from my viewpoint. I started a building and construction training school about 10 years ago. And when I was convincing the Nigerians in the diaspora, when I was trying to convince them that any state-of-the-art equipment that we would need in that training school, that I was ready to get, some of them were disillusioned. Gbola is not going to be easy. We need total station, and total station is going to be costing around $20,000. And I was looking at them and I was laughing, because by then I had known that for every state-of-the-art equipment, just like a popular phone that most of you people carry, Unicorn 16, something 17, or something 10, you will get an equivalent in China that does just about everything that phone does, for as low as 15 to 20% of the market value of this. So when I was telling my partners, the technical partners with whom I wanted to start the training school, they were telling me, Gbola, we need this equipment, and they listed the equipment, and the total price they gave or projected was around 180 to 200,000 US. My sister, we got everything for less than 36,000 US. You know why? Because I have a friend who they never knew then. Eventually, I made him a member of the board of directors of the training institute, which is still existing. I made him and you know what? He has an office in Shenzhen. And for every equipment that my friends who had functioned in England, who had functioned in the United States of America, who were functioning in Dubai, were thinking that the West was the author, I had known years before, as a result of my journalistic listening, I had known years before that the brand owners, we call it gold plating. The brand owners will go like that famous telephone company, will go to China to go and do the hardware. They will have the software in the West and put a brand to it. And you will buy it about 15 times more than what ordinarily they made it for them in China. So I'm sitting here now that is the way we Nigerians and Africans, those of us in leadership in Nigeria and in Africa, and I'm not talking about those who are in political leadership alone, even those of us who are in sectorial leadership. That is the way we must be playing China against the West and the West against China.
I want to get to the point you just raised in just a moment, because it's very important to talk about how China is the manufacturing hub of the world and what that means for us, because we seem to be, everything is left for China to produce and manufacture and then distribute to the rest of the world. But I wanted to ask you, because I heard, I think it was the Minister of Foreign Affairs, talking about now we're coming to Nigeria, how our partnership with China have moved from the strategic partnership to the comprehensive strategic partnership, which means that we are now engaging with China on a level higher across more fields and sectors. Does that mean, in terms of, when you look at that, how do we benefit? Because sometimes, and I always use this, it seems very, this, I don't know if you know Johnny Bravo, he's big at the top and very tiny at the bottom. And I always say sometimes some of these agreements, a Johnny Bravo agreement where it's big at the top, which means that the West and the East seem to take more benefits. Then Africa, takes the very, little benefit at the bottom. But how do we ensure that we are benefiting from some of these agreements, on equal grounds, at least almost on equal grounds from some of these agreements?
That is a function. That is going to be a function of the intellectual robustness of our leadership, visioning, and strategy. Look, life is many watching this program now may not like the way I put it, but let me be very practical with my viewers. Life is about human beings taking advantage of human beings. As a young boy, when I first read the passage in the Bible that God will take from those who do not have to give to those who have, I was shocked. There were some things as a boy growing up, when I came across in some, even in scriptures, I was shocked. But that's the truth of life. China is in this for what is China gaining. Nigeria should approach it. Let me give you a typical example. About 80 to 90% of what Nigeria makes from China now is the oil they buy from Nigeria. And yet China is the manufacturing this of the world. And they need so many of the raw materials that we have in Nigeria. So many. And you see, this kind of agreement should be leveraged to say, China, you know what? We will let you have these raw materials, but to a minimally processed rate. Whenever you add value to anything, you get far more than when you ship out raw. Those should be our strategy.
I think you already hit on the point. What I said, I will come back to that, because the worry is that we're running the risk of just becoming China's biggest trade partner in terms of how it exports its commodities back to Africa. Now, China wants to do business with Africa in terms of renewable energy, and one of the strategies is to ensure that the market is for the kind of business it wants to do. Perhaps maybe training of people who would receive those kind of equipment and be able to sell. But I am wondering, are we not also running the risk of killing our manufacturing industry? How do we ensure that, look, we're also part of the manufacturing process, and we're not just, the dumping ground for all of these products?
Given your last question, let me give you a practical example that speaks, an empirical example of what happened in South Africa in the last 3 years. China, we know that the United States of America invented the technology that has made solar power generation what it is today. They invented it, but China overdeveloped it, and China made it become so affordable that today, you know what happened in South Africa about in the last 3 years? Many Nigerians watching will be shocked what I'm going to say. South Africa was suffering power outages just as we suffer in Nigeria. And the South African middle class, mostly white, the South African middle and upper class just decided that it was no good for them to be on the national grid. And in 2 years, South African middle class installed 8 gigawatts, not megawatts, so 8 gigawatts of solar energy, to the extent that people were leaving the national grid, and the national grid became less challenged, that now the national grid even supplies power more and better to the so-called indigents. But it took a middle class, it took an elite class that knows that, the cost of solar energy has gone down so dramatically. We can find a way of systematically installing it without even letting the government be involved. And 8 gigawatts, not megawatts, 8 gigawatts of power was installed on South African homes, South African businesses in 2 years that they were leaving the national grid. I sit here as a member of the Nigerian middle class. I sit here as a member of the Nigerian elite, thinking, how does our people think? Beyond parties. The best of us will come out in December. Champagne this thing, dirty December, all the Lagos alone, Lagos State alone in December, from those who came from the diaspora, got nothing less than 15 to 20 billion Nigerian Nigerian naira injected into it. And yet, 80% of the hotels are still, of the hotels that housed these people when they came, that are coming, all those monies, you wonder, are they even planning to reinvest it in that business, get solar done, reduce? I drove here ordinarily with a truck that if I were to drive it some months ago to come here from the mainland, I'd be slapping myself. But I didn't bother because the whole thing that brought me from the mainland here is less than 2,000 naira. In an 8 liter.
Did you convert to CNG?
Look, you must always. We are in a state of the art studio. What is all this? The gizmos, the gadgetry, is technology. You must always put yourself at a competitive advantage. And the irony is that Nigeria has lots and lots of youngsters.
But let me ask you, because again, one of the worry for a lot of people is that we are becoming over-dependent. We owe China a lot. In terms of how much we owe, outside the World Bank and the IMF, China will be the third, that we owe so much to. And then there is also the trading, and there is most of our rails are being constructed by, Chinese firms. And people are wondering, this overdependence, will it not come back to bite us? Shouldn't we be careful in terms of how much we're depending on China?
We ain't seen it yet. And you know what I'm saying? We ain't seen it yet. As we speak, if you look at the trade figures between Nigeria and China, you will know we are comedians. That the Secretary of State, that the Chinese Foreign Minister came, to Nigeria and was speaking all the right, words and languages, giving Nigeria the honor and this thing. It's just because this is one of the cheapest markets for them. This is one of the cheapest markets for them to manage. And look, it's not about the infrastructure. To China, it's tokenism. China just committed within China to the biggest and the most expensive infrastructure project on the face of the earth. $100 billion. The new dam that they are building in the Tibetan region. So if they give a Nigeria to do, eastern line from Port Harcourt to Maiduguri, if they give you about 2.2 to 2.5 billion US dollars, and no, it's not a gift, it's not a grant, it's a loan, and China does not forgive debt. People should listen and listen carefully.
We've seen them take parts of regions of countries.
At some point, with the way we are running the Lagos-Ibadan Railroad now and the Abuja-Kaduna Railroad, those assets at some point will likely go and belong to China. Let me prepare Nigerians for it. We must be very calculated. We must be strategic. We must know what we want, and we must also
we do have to live with that. The federal government has said it is also very strategic and brutal in how it works on its agreements. Let's trust that the government knows what it is doing in the the long run. But
even if I trust those who are in political leadership at the top, the career diplomats that we have, and the bureaucracy that we run.
All right, we do have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time. I know we'll have you over and over again. Now that we've seen you for the first time this year, Public Affairs Analyst Gbola Oba, thank you for your time.
Thank you for the opportunity.
All right, you're still watching Standpoint. We'll take a break now. When we return, we'll be turning attention to security. Stay with us.